There's an author named Milan Kundera. He's great. Read some of his books if you ever get a chance. But in this one particular one called Immortality, it begins with him at the beginning of a day, and he's trying to get up, but what happens is he just keeps sleeping in over and over again. There is a clock radio that has gone off long ago, but for a good hour or so, he keeps sleeping through the clock radio. And what happens is that the voices in the news broadcast that are coming over keep interjecting into his dreams, so that he starts to dream about an opera singer giving an interview or a bomb explosion somewhere on the other side of the world. This state of liminal waking and sleeping is one that carries throughout the novel as you see how much people are simply sleepwalking their way through life, not really aware of what's going on either in their own lives nor attuned to the nuances of what is going on in the rest of the world. Now, I know exactly what this feels like. I know exactly what it feels like to sleep through that clock radio for hours and hours, because it happens to me sometimes too. All Things Considered and Morning Edition on NPR are often interwoven into my own morning dreams as I start to dream about the new cabinet or something that's happening in Afghanistan. So often we find ourselves in this same position, somewhere in between dreaming and waking. And yet here we hear it from Jesus in the Gospel of Mark this morning. What he says to the people gathered, he says to us today, keep awake. Keep awake. Stay alert to the signs of what is going on in the world. Stay aware of what is happening, not only in the events of time as they unfold, but in terms of spiritual reality. Be attuned, be aware. Open your eyes and your senses to see reality as it really is. Keep awake and keep looking for the Son of Man in his coming in great glory. Now, as you can see, we are beginning the season of Advent, beloved of Episcopalians and Anglicans around the world. And I've got to tell you, the proportion of people in our society who love Advent is dwindling. Not only as the people who attend mainline denominations is declining, but also just in proportion to the pull of the other seasons that are going on right now. And you know, you wouldn't be a crotchety old preacher if you didn't say something about the holiday shopping season that coincides with this holy season of Advent. As a matter of fact, I call it the holiday shopping season because that is the way I heard it referred to on the news the other day. There was a news anchor who on Monday announced the holiday shopping season has begun. Now, I don't know what official calendar this anchor was using or how we determine any longer when the holiday shopping season has begun, but apparently it's underway. And every year it runs parallel to our holy season of Advent. What's so shocking about these two is that they are tugging us into completely different directions. And as people who follow this liturgical tradition of Advent, who listen to these ancient stories about staying awake, we are trying to heighten our sense of what is going on in the world at the same time that we are participating in this national yearly festival that seeks to deaden our senses, to distract us from what is really going on with the comforts and the drama of consumerism and buying. It's a difficult task, and it's one of the reasons that coming to church during Advent feels like a respite. It feels like a break from everything else that's going on in the world. I mean, what a strange way to prepare for the birth of the Son of God, to prepare for the birth of the Messiah at the festival of the Nativity on Christmas. We light these candles, we mark time, we wait patiently. We practice something called joyful expectation. And the thing that launches the whole season off is this theme of staying awake, of being alert and alive. It's the opposite of deadening ourselves and our senses. It's the opposite of participating in something that really isn't making any difference in the world other than maybe putting a smile on our own faces or that of someone to whom we give a gift. Being awake means being awake not only to your own reality, but to everyone else's as well. This message about staying awake, about looking for the signs, my goodness, don't we know what that means this year? It was just about 1 year ago this week that there was the very first reported case of a coronavirus respiratory illness happening way over in China in some city that most Americans had never heard of, even though it's larger than most American cities. And I remember those first news reports that I saw, maybe in December or January, thinking, oh dear, how terrible for those people. I remember the health experts on TV saying that if we didn't do anything, it would become a really big problem, might even come to the US. I remember those first cases reported in Seattle, and then later on in New York City. And then I remember the sense of gloom that was like a shadow being cast in our direction as we saw the reports from Asia and Europe of people being sick, terrible things happening, whole cities and countries being shut down. And yet I remember just as well that feeling of being asleep. It was like trying to wake up and listening to the news at the same time that you were dreaming. It was like I knew it was sort of happening, but I couldn't really believe that it was going to happen here, to us, to our church. I never would have imagined back in Lent that by Advent we would still be in this situation, all of us sitting in these pews with these masks on, unable to gather and sing and celebrate the way that we usually do. I was asleep. Most of the rest of us were as well. And even as we struggled to awaken to the reality of what was happening, it simply wasn't enough. I take in today's gospel message a clear call to all of us to be awake. It doesn't even take a next time for us to start practicing that. The reason we do this year after year, Advent after Advent, is because we as human beings aren't really wired to be awake and aware all the time. It's uncomfortable, it hurts, and it's hard. We would rather hit the snooze button and slumber just a little bit longer, even if that news coming off the clock radio interferes with our dreams as we're sleeping. That's why we have to practice it, to practice being awake. Not trying to shoehorn reality into the way that we want it to be, but acknowledging reality the way that it is and the way that God creates it and sustains it. You know, that novel I was talking about, so much of it is about characters who are sort of walking through life like zombies, as if they are sleepwalking. And isn't that exactly what we did in the spring? Sleepwalked right into a crisis, a tragedy. And then after it happened to us, it happened to hundreds of thousands more Americans in other parts of the country who, from our perspective, maybe should have known better since we went through it. But from the perspective of many other parts of the world, we should have known better because we saw them go through it. And so it goes on. The only way to stop this cycle is for us to practice being awake, to take Jesus at his word, and to see things with our eyes wide open. And what are some of those things that we have discovered in the past 8 months? Well, I can't answer this question fully for you. And actually, I think it's probably going to take years and years and years of reflection as a people to learn all of the lessons that are being taught to us right now, difficult lessons. If you're looking for some sort of discipline this Advent, I commend that to you. To sit down every day, or maybe even just today or on Sunday mornings, and take stock of what it is that you have learned in the past 9 months. How has your awareness been raised? In what ways do you feel more awake? What have you seen for the first time that you may have blinded yourself to in the past? What deeper truth have you discovered? The fact of the matter is that we have been blind to so many problems, things that we were just continuing to hit the snooze button on. The terrible inequality in our society that means that some people with this terrible virus were forced back out into work even as they were sick, while others were able to enjoy state-of-the-art medical treatment. The uneven way in which the powers that be were prepared for this crisis, and the way that people with power started to act like children, fighting with one another, even as tens of thousands of people died. Just as an aside, do you know how many people died in New York City and New York State this spring? 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 people. So many souls lost. Such a horrible tragedy. How on earth could we have been so asleep to the underlying problems in our society that could have led to this? And yet being awake also means being awake to God's grace. Think for just a moment of the myriad ways that you have experienced this grace in your life, the presence of God in your life in ways that you never would have seen before. In being forced to slow down and to isolate, even in those difficult moments, have you had glimmers of something new, something sacred, something special that maybe you wouldn't have seen before? In having your routines interrupted, have you discovered something deeper? On a day like this past Thursday, Thanksgiving, when so many of us would have been with friends or family, but instead were Zooming or FaceTiming or having Thanksgiving for one or two, did you discover something new about gratitude? Something different? Something of which you became more aware? As for me, on Thursday, it was such a beautiful day here in New York City. Actually, my first Thanksgiving ever in this place, because I've always been traveling somewhere else to see family. And so I took advantage of the day and I went into the park. And I thought I'd go for a little run, but honestly, the day was so nice, I just decided to enjoy it. I don't think I'd ever been so aware and so thankful of the beauty of this time of year in this place, with the sun shining, the trees almost done with their leaves. I felt that sense of grace, and I realized that actually, in having my normal routine interrupted, by slowing down and being at home, I was able to give thanks in ways that I hadn't before. It certainly was no compensation for not being able to see family, but it was something deeper, something of which I became aware for the very first time. And maybe you had a similar experience. Friends, we as Christians believe in the second coming of our Lord. We are given all kinds of instruction about how to prepare for this, how to look for it. We are told that it is not for us to know the day or the hour when it will happen, but it will happen. And so our job is simply to stay aware, to keep awake, in the words of Jesus. This Advent, perhaps more than any one before, we truly are bidden to keep awake. We are people who keep vigil, week after week, day after day, year after year. And in keeping vigil, we keep awake. We stay ready. We are ready for whatever may come through our prayers and in being aware of God's grace which flows in and through all things. I wish you a very blessed Advent. I wish you to stay awake in this darkest time of year. And I hope that your eyes will be opened to God's hand at work around you in new and different ways. Amen.